Okay, we're on. Good evening, everyone. It's October 8th, 2019, for the joint meeting of the Wenham Board of Selectmen and the Wenham FinCom to go over our budget forecast. We have the four members of the FinCom, which you might want to introduce your members.
Sure, happy to. Well, I'll call the meeting to order for FinCom, and my name is Alex Began, and we can just go on down the line.
Jim Purdy.
Carrie Jelsma.
Mike Tharian.
Great.
Right. So we're here.
And David Molitano is not able to join us tonight. Our fifth member. Yep.
Right. So did you still have a quorum with four?
That we do.
You would have had a quorum with three, but okay. Take it away, Anthony, please.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Before we start, I just want to thank our team who's been working with me in putting this together tonight, and that's our Finance Director, Patty Moore, our Town Accountant, Chris Holak, and of course, Jackie Brezhnehan, who I think does everything here in town. So we've really spent a great deal of time talking about this and trying to think of ways to eventually come to a balanced budget. So without further ado, I'll go through the presentation. So the agenda for this evening, I think it's best, there's 25 slides, and it could take some time to talk about all these, so I think it's best if we hold the questions till after. Maybe if you could just make some notations on the slide that might be of interest or in question or any other questions, and then once we're done, we can go through all the questions and we can go back to slides and so forth, just for the sake of making sure that all the information is presented out there so we don't get tired towards the end of the evening.
Fair request. Thank you.
You may anyway, but go ahead.
So we're going to talk about our agenda as our current financial status, what's our FY21 budget capacity, how did we get here, and where do we go from here, process implications, and ultimately how do we get to a balanced budget. So prior budget strategies, current and past budget drivers is the regional school district. You've had the enrollment shift. I think that you've really felt the pressures of that for the past 5 years, in addition to the school net operating increase. We've had limited revenue growth from local receipts or new growth and increases of required spending, pensions, that being pensions and health insurance costs. Past practices, use of free cash to balance the operating budget. There's been no significant capital investment or funding mechanism for future capital projects. There's been no investment in other reserves, that being capital or an enrollment shift reserve or a personnel reserve. Habitual use of the reserve fund for, in state grants to subsidize operating budgets, and we've seen that with some legal costs. Some trash increases that went on in prior years with the HILTs. The grants, the COA utilized one of their grants to fund the van, and the library is using some grant funds to pay for utility costs. So, and there's also been no significant contribution to the stabilization fund since 2001. Of which it's currently at approximately $530,000. So I want to talk about some of DOR and the GFOA best practices. Depletion of free cash, particularly if used to balance the annual budgets, can endanger future spending plans if it is not regenerated the following year. Drawdown on total reserves may result in a negative impact on the community's credit rating. Municipalities should maintain a minimum reserve level of 2 months of operating expenses, which is 17% of our total annual budget, or $3.4 million. And that's why right now we're in a situation where Patty is actually having a hard time paying our bills because of the cash flow. We have nothing in reserve to be able to make those payments. So that's a pretty important point. And direct the use of all portions of free cash as a funding source for the stabilization or as an outlay for one-time capital projects. Moving forward, we're proposing eliminating the use of free cash to balance the budget. No excess levy capacity, use of the DOR best practices for free cash spending, and review and update our financial policies with regards to our reserves, free cash, and how to fund that capital investment plan. Our budget expense increase assumptions that we used, so our expenses, we just did a modest 0 to 1.5% growth. And in personnel is a 2 to 4% growth, and that's based on COLA and merit increases. And for library staff, it's COLA and longevity steps. Pension, our projection, we're projecting 7% increase. Health insurance, 6% increase, and adding an additional 10% on our OPEB funding schedule. Assumed FY21 school budget drivers. We're assuming no increase for Essex Tech enrollment and a 3% net operating increase. For the Hamilton-Wenham Regional School District, our preliminary estimate increase includes just a 3% net operating increase. We won't have the enrollment numbers until sometime later this month. I do have a meeting with Patty and Chris tomorrow with Superintendent Kuppenberger. She's meeting with our team as well as the Hamilton team, so hopefully we'll have some information on what they're looking for a forecast. And one thing that she did mention, and it was pretty evident to me in touring the schools, is that there's some capital needs that are going to be necessary that I'm sure that they'll be bringing up. This graph just shows the enrollment trends. You've probably seen this from year to year. Blue is Hamilton. That's just been going down, their enrollment number, as Wenham has increased from 15 to 20. The additional budget impact due to that enrollment shift, as you can see, for the past 5 years, those numbers are really high, and it really contributed greatly to budget issues here in Wenham. Revenue assumptions that we used. New growth at $150,000 based on recent actuals and current construction projects. No significant changes in local receipts. We're assuming state aid to be returning to the FY19 levels, as the increase in FY20 it was due to that takeover of the emergency dispatch, so we're assuming that money will go away, and we'll get back to the FY19 spending, state aid. Reduction in reliance on free cash from $700,000, which for this fiscal year that we're in, to 0. Free cash levels going down every year for the past 4 years as the town budgets more tightly. We can no longer rely on free cash to balance the budget, and reliance on free cash only intensifies our current structural deficit. Our allowance for abatements is going to remain static at $195,000 based on the senior exemption taking effect and the abatement histories. This chart right here, you have the full spreadsheet, but just to sum it up, the top portion, I was playing with this all day and I think it's dying, but the top portion is the property taxes. We're expected $17 million. $17+ million. Local receipts is $2.5 million. So for our net revenue is $19,844,420. Our projected FY21 appropriations are $20,853,235, which creates the FY21 structural deficit of approximately $1 million. And again, this is really based on preliminary estimates and has 0 input from town departments. So I would only expect that $1 million number to go north of that once we hear from departments. Here's the expenditure projection, just how it breaks down, how we get to that $20 million for each sector of our government, general government, public safety, education, all those numbers there. And again, I just wanted to bring up this slide again because our expenses that assumptions are based on right there, the 0.1.5% expenses, personnel 2.4, pension 7, health insurance 6%, and that increase in 10,000 to OPEB.
The 10,000 is an increase, or it's just, it's there as a figure?
It's an increase.
Every year we increase it by 10 grand.
Okay,
Right.
I thought that's what I remember.
So this slide talks about certified free cash from FY13 to FY19. So those are the numbers, and as you can see, I mentioned the past 4 years, how that is going down. So from our highest point of 1.37 million to FY19, the estimate that we're projecting right now at $954,000.
When do you expect that to be certified, Anthony? I'm sorry, I didn't want any questions.
It's all submitted. We're just waiting on DOR to review it and approve it.
Okay.
Me and Patty have everything submitted to them. We submitted it last week, so hopefully by end of this week, early next week, hopefully.
Thank you.
So this chart is just a little bit of history on the tax rate and capacity over time. It really goes, it was interesting when we were looking at this because come right about 2013, and 2013, you're going to see on the next slide, where we blow this up, that we really had a large excess levy between FY13 and FY16 of $2.3 million that we didn't tax to. If you look in 16 and 17, the tax rate was reduced to 16.98 and 18.33. Those 2 years, we had excess and deficiency from the school department. That's when you had, I believe you had consultants in here that used that money to decrease the tax rate and put that excess and deficiency towards the operating budget. And that probably would have been pretty handy as an enrollment shift reserve to deal with the last issues that you've been having over the past several years. So as I said, that excess levy was $2.3 million that was left out there, which would have grown at 2.5%. And then the excess levy from FY17 to FY19 was only $80,000. So we are taxing pretty much to the levy limit. So use of free cash and excess and deficiency. Again, that excess, that red is the amount that was returned to Wenham from the school department for the excess and deficiency, and that was used to, for the operating budget. So, and you can see the prior 3 years was at $750,000, and that last FY20 was $700,000. So total free cash used through that period of time from 15 to 20 was $3.8 million, and the excess levy capacity missed from 15 and 16 was $1.3 million. Free cash over time, so the green is the amount that was certified. In the case of FY19, it's still the estimate, and the red is the amount that was used to subsidize the operating budget. So as you can see, really that certified free cash is just going down, and we've been pretty much constant for the past 4 years at the $750,000 mark. So we're getting to that point where it's just, we need to have another idea instead of using the free cash. So how do we get to a balanced budget? So revenue increases we can look at, trash fees. Other usage fees, we currently are reviewing that as well as in the building department. Take a look at the recreation agreement. The IMA with Hamilton on the rec fund, maybe there's a way that they can have more of a, less of a reliance on the general fund for their operations and be a little bit more of a self-sustaining operation. Pleasant Pond fee increases. I think there was an email that floated around earlier. We took a look at that this year. So we only collected approximately $3,300 in fees from those parking stickers, yet the expenses were totaled in the $24,000. So the towns of Wenham and Hamilton are subsidizing the Pleasant Pond fee. For us, I think it was around $9,000 or $10,000. You know, and every little bit helps, so that's why we really, everything has to be on the table to be looked at. And ultimately, there's the Proposition 2.5 override. For the expense decreases, we're looking at the health insurance, seeing what can be done there. Looking at billing back the water fund for some indirect costs. Elimination of loose leaf pickup, which is approximately, his bill is estimated to be about $45,000 annually. And then some sort, maybe a partial Prop 2.5, but even with that, you'd have staff cuts and service reductions if we didn't go for the full $1 million. So anything less of that, we'd be looking at some staff cuts and service reductions, which would be pretty impactful. Oops. All right, our budget building process. So the budget forms have been out to departments last week. We asked them to prepare a level service budget. The Hamilton Wenham Regional School District's budget request levels are established in December, and if an operating override is likely needed, department heads will be asked to deliver a second iteration of their budgets to keep the town within our levy limits so that we can understand the impacts if it was to fail. So the Board of Selectmen at that point will need to determine what the override policy would be. Over the next month and a half, we're going to work with department heads on the initial FY21 operating and capital budget request and refine the town expense needs. Refine town expense needs, excuse me. Question is, should we meet with the school district and Hamilton officials to discuss these anticipated challenges, limited fiscal capacity, and the potential for the override scenarios before or after the standard joint BOS and FinCom meeting with department heads presentations in December? You know, I will say, as I mentioned, that where our team is meeting with Superintendent Kuchenberg tomorrow, I'm hopeful that the intent of her meeting was to kind of give us a little idea of her financial forecast. So hopefully we'll have some information on that, and maybe that will answer that question for the board in the near future. And our budget schedule going forward, so all the requests from departments are due back in on November 1st. During the month of November, we'll have some meetings with department heads reviewing their requests. We're looking at December, early December for the Saturday budget meeting. January, the Board of Selectmen will finalize the policy direction and complete their review. January through February, FinCom will have their budget review, and the Board of Selectmen warrant article review. And in March, first week in March is really the deadline to finalize that warrant. That's our presentation for this evening, and I'm sure you have tons of questions, and that's why our team's available here to answer those.
On your second iteration, which you suggested here, have you given the department heads a percentage potential reduction? And if so, how much? If not, why not?
So we haven't addressed that yet with them. The department heads know about the current structural deficit. They know that the consequences of the decisions that are made by the board, and you know, something that I don't think that we really can count on is the departments picking up $1 million structural deficit. You do not have the staff in town to make those cuts, or you're going to see severe severe staff reductions. It's bare bones from what I've seen here. So, yes, we can ask them to dig down deep, but it's certainly not going to come to $1 million. Nowhere close.
I didn't assume for a minute that they were going to clean house and, take care of $1 million. But if you get a mindset going that, okay, this is not going to be a flush year, you set the pace saying, okay, where can you trim back, and start thinking about it now. And if you give them a percentage to work with, I did this back in '08, and it really helped get people thinking early on instead of later on.
Yeah, as I indicated in an earlier slide, everything is on the table. We should be looking at revenues, and we should be looking at expenses. So when I mentioned healthcare cost, and, that's a large dollar amount, and whether or not we'd have to work with our unions and our staffs and our employees on any design plan changes that can save us money. So everything has to be on the table when you're talking about $1 million structural deficit. So departments know that, they're aware of it, but, as one department here, I think that he could attest that he doesn't have much staff, and really the money is in staff.
We've run a very conservative ship for many, many years, and I think that's how we got to where we are in a good way. Everybody's pulled together as a team, so I'm not saying that there's been anybody fat and happy, just the opposite. We've run a very efficient operation, and I've been very proud to say that. And I look at each department head, and I've always said, they do a good job for not a whole lot of bang. So,
And some of those staffing, you mentioned 2008, some of those reductions that were made during the last fiscal crisis, the staff that was reduced or eliminated has not been brought up, so we're still dealing with a part-time assessor, we're still dealing with a part-time conservation agent, and so we really never fully recovered from those cuts.
I think, if I may, just to kind of follow on to John's point about going out to the department heads for their preliminary budget, beyond the forecast, but down to the next level of detail, and thinking about the past couple of years. Similar to what you said, Anthony, the departments are asked to provide a level services, and then I think it was program enhancement potential with justification and rationale that was done last year, and they put a lot of work into that. They provided great rationale for any additional needs, many of which were deferred for the long haul, no doubt. A lot of these departments have been asked to do what they do, which is a lot with very little. The FinCom, what we found is throughout our budget process last year, excuse me, I've been yelling to the second grade girls soccer team right before coming here.
Shame on you, shame on you.
Well,
somebody's got to do the cheating.
someone's got to yell. The Golden Cheetahs need to hear their coach. So FinCom we found ourselves in the position of basically reviewing very, very carefully this thoughtful, programmatic rationale as to all the additional expenditures. And unfortunately, because of the situation that we're in and find ourselves in the prior year with the override as well, had to defer most of those, right? We prioritized and reprioritized with the finance director and TA. And so I guess just in terms of efficiency of process, and not to suggest it would be a waste of time, but maybe we could start with that, note any changes, because directionally it's opposite to say, give us level services and a little more, noting that we might come back and ask for you to make do with less.
Yeah.
So they're not thinking it could be one of both ways, because realistically,
It's a
it's
mixed
the-
message. Yeah, you're right.
it's the reduction that we might, need to entertain. Not saying that we need to know what percentage it might be. If there were any reductions by department, those would likely vary and not be uniform consistency across the board. Just a thought there.
And clearly, those reductions would result in service reductions. I mean,
Correct.
those would have to be policy decisions that are made here as far as what the town's willing to give up for a service in exchange for those reductions.
Right. And not all of those, and there are service reductions, there are staff, there are all sorts of budgetary expense reductions, which could be, and many of which should be considered, but that doesn't mean they're all staffing. Like, we appreciate, for example, your efforts and Anthony's efforts to consider the, ideas for trash fees and shifting some of the expense potentially, and a long ways to go there to look at all the numbers, consider all the options, both from from a public expectation and service standpoint, as well as the financial impact and what it really means for the budget. I'm not saying we spend the whole budget cycle on it, but to go through rigorously and consider all the options, I think is important to show the residents that we're doing all we can to limit the override impact. And then just a comment on the free cash. Certainly agree it's less than desirable a usage of free cash to balance the budget over the past several years. I think we did reduce our reliance upon free cash in the past couple of years, admittedly marginally, right, down to 700 or 700
yeah.
from 750. So we're chipping away at our dependence on it, but certainly not eliminating it. And I think to suggest that we're going to be able to eliminate it in whole
It's a
is
goal.
probably premature.
Yeah, it's a long-term goal.
think we definitely agree.
We have to walk before we run.
Right.
And certainly, there are things that free cash can be used for that are absolutely appropriate. Capital, fund and reserves, any of those one-time expenditures. So I think what the town administrator is suggesting is that we would want to stop using free cash to balance our budget, but certainly for those real appropriate uses, we'd want to continue that.
Right, absolutely. And last year at this time, I think, sorry, just one more point, we're at around 960,000 shortfall deficit. Lot of moving parts at this stage. I know we all know that. I just want to restate the obvious that we've got some plugs which are probably historically somewhat accurate with their percentage-wise, give or take a point. Others which might be off meaningfully.
Right.
And things can and will change to the tune of hundreds of thousands to move that.
Well, the number could be off a lot, since the regional school district represents 50% of our budget, would be the enrollment numbers that's going to come out in a couple of weeks. So we could be surprised,
Be nice.
hurtfully surprised if the graph still indicates that Wenhamites are using the school system more and Hamiltonians less. So that's going to change the numbers, could be a lot, meaningfully. Probably nothing else that's going to come up in the next month or 2 months that's going to cause that, other than initiatives we take to cause the numbers to change ourselves. But so I think that it'd be helpful if you send around to the committee, both committees, as soon as you get those enrollment numbers, and what impact the final numbers have on the projections you have in this slide deck right here. Just to,
I think the school's operating expenses, of course, are also a pretty big unknown and could be significant. I don't remember the percentage from last year, but I think it was significantly higher than 3%. It's more like 5%.
5 to 6.
Yeah, so, that's another, like you said, I think earlier, Anthony, it's not likely to go down from our assumption. I'm glad that you continue to meet with the superintendent and Hamilton. I've been, I kind of follow the school committee meetings. I don't think the school committee has had a presentation on their, so I'd be a little surprised if the superintendent at this point was willing to go out too far on a limb and say what her projections are since
the interim superintendent.
the interim superintendent, before they've really been flushed out or at least presented to the school committee, but keeping those lines of communication open with the administration and with the town, is, with town of Hamilton is a good idea.
In your meeting tomorrow with the superintendent, maybe you could get a beginning sense of how the new education funding bill may positively impact us. My understanding is very informal that we may get a little bit more money for transportation for special needs.
I would not consider it to be significant at all, based on some conversations, some research I've done and some conversations I've had with Bruce and Brad. They were actually really concerned because, as these all do, they seem to be targeted towards low income or high-density populations, and somehow we...
I thought they had carved out, to some extent, the special ed
Right.
funding transportation issue.
But I don't think that's new this
I
year.
thought so.
I think they've been working on that, and I think those are the two areas where we may see something.
Yeah.
But I don't
But
think
not
that's gonna
significant.
solve the problem. Just saying, just my opinion.
And Anthony,
Yes.
following up on Finance Director's comment about capital, I've always had a very, very strong concern about our lack of attention to capital needs. And we had a capital committee at one time that had identified capital needs, be it boilers, roofs, and so forth. Does somebody have that in hand at this point, and what are we looking at for the replacement of a roof somewhere? For example, the police station, it's now been cataloged in a number of years, and painting.
So is that the one that was done with MRI, or was it Collins Center?
I know Jeff Shelgan had one.
As far as we did it,
Well,
we did it,
pages and
did it
pages.
in-house.
Yeah, no, we have one since I just came across a capital improvement plan that was.
From nine-
It's in the
19.
budget document.
Peter
Years,
did
years,
one
yeah.
2 years ago, I
Yeah.
think.
It's like
Peter
a
did
5-year, yeah.
17, sorry.
17, yeah. I just don't think we have funded.
Exactly. That's the
We
thing.
didn't have any free cash to fund it, so it kind of.
So maybe we need to dust it off
my
and
concern
update
is-
it and
Don't do a study and just throw it on the
do
shelf.
something.
Do a study and then keep it active, and in the case of capital, the reason this building is what it is today is because we had to pay the big price for neglect for decades and decades and decades. I mean, we did nothing here, and the poor building was just a mess.
And I would agree with you, that's important, and that's why, in an earlier slide, I talked about having financial policies. So we have an amount that we identify as free cash that's allocated to the capital improvement plan, because we could talk about what our needs are, but if we can't fund it,
Don't put it on the table.
so we almost have, that policy would, and a lot of communities have it where so much is automatically, a certain percentage of free cash is put into the capital improvement plan.
Improvements every year.
So that's why I said maybe we should, it's one of the things that we should look at. So this way, it kind of puts us in a situation where, okay, we're going to fund it. Maybe not as much as we'd like right
That's what
now,
we've been doing
because,
over at the Iron Rail, for example, and that's why we did get the pavement done, the roof done, and so forth. And now, there's probably gonna be a need for a septic, but it's being planned out as
Right.
opposed to reactionary.
right, and that's why, when we say we'd like to get away from free cash or operating budget, but we really want to make sure that we address the capital needs. We
Absolutely.
really want to address our reserves.
Yeah.
If the economy goes like this, and we've been riding a good wave, and when it hits, and state aid gets cut, and all of those things that is going to be devastating to this community. Because, and if we have no reserves where we could, that rainy day fund to help burden that, in a bad economy, we're going to be asking the taxpayers for even
Lack
more.
of looking at these things on a regular basis will do exactly what they did at the Cutler School on us a few years back, where they hit us with a $1.2 million bill
Yeah.
out of nowhere, because nobody in 60 years took into consideration the boiler may get bad.
Right.
I mean, to me, that's just
Yeah,
plain
no,
stick your head in the sand.
I think we all agree with that thinking.
So,
To-
aside from go ahead, I'm sorry, go ahead, Karen.
To piggyback on the cap plan issue, we had talked a little bit the past couple budget years with Peter about expanding beyond just capital planning. We have an open space recreation plan, we have an economic development plan, like we're working on all these different pieces of the town and the town's needs. And once we get all those pieces figured out, including cap plan, which is important, get more of a step back, what are our priorities, and have more like a strategic plan, which is important, especially in these tight budget times, to figure out when you do have to make tough decisions, what are the priorities?
Right. I'd be remiss not to throw in Jackie's master plan, the lack of a
Yeah,
master
that,
plan,
yeah.
and, I think that helps drive some of those decision-making when you have a master plan that really plans out the future for the next 30 years for
Absolutely.
Wenham. So, and that was, I was fortunate that Sean Cronin, who's the Deputy Commissioner of Local Services, he's the governor's and lieutenant governor's right hand. I used to work with him in Brookline, so he actually came out and sat with Patty and myself, and we presented this scenario to him and ran all this information through him, and I said, geez, we really need a master plan, and we just don't have the money for a master. Master plans can be, anywhere from $50,000 to $150,000 or greater, depending on the size of the community. So he did give me an idea on where we could look for a little assistance on designing a master plan, so I'm gonna look at that real closely, and then if there's other funds that we may need, there could be some grant opportunities through his office to help us bridge that financial gap. So, yeah, I think that that's important. You know, we had that in the community I came from, and it really helped focus the
Big bang
priorities. Yeah, it really was.
Yep.
And the timing, to piggyback on that, Carrie, the timing is important, because we have 3 or 4 open space and recreation that are new, fresh plans. So the information is current. So if we were able to get some grant
Yeah.
money and put together a master plan now, we could do it with existing data that's current.
Right,
5
relevant.
years from now, we may be having to
Yeah.
redo some.
Yeah, in some state grants, you know, having a master plan is just another box to check, which creates a little higher grading. So,
Because it takes into consideration all these components.
All the
Yes.
moving parts, yep, yep.
Yeah, and for example, one of the capital issues that we need to do, I'm pretty sure, is last year we were supposed to look at and fund a new roof on the senior center.
oh, yeah,
And
it should be a
I knew
priority.
we could buy
yeah.
another year, but I don't know if we can buy 2 or 3 more. So,
Some of the seniors are very, former roofers, by the way, too.
I think
Oh,
really,
get
we'll
them
throw
up
them all up there.
No liability
80
there.
years old, we just
Made that up.
No, it's a good, you know, a roof leaking is just, when water gets in a house, we know that
Bad.
the type of damage that it can control,
Yeah.
God forbid, mold issue, you know, it's nothing good. And that's something that we've all have talked about. Really, it should be a priority that we address.
Yep. I have a couple other questions and thoughts about revenue increases. Do you have a rough estimate of what these would amount to be? Like 400,000?
You know, it depends. And some like, you know, we pay 400, and I think the estimate for trash fees for next fiscal year is somewhere in the range of $450,000. A lot of communities will use many different approaches to recover some of those fees, maybe all of those fees. It all depends. So, you know, there could be something there. Couple other things that I've been looking at that didn't make the presentation is the town adopting the local option with meals tax. By doing that, just
Yeah.
looking at the DOR estimates that they had online, that could be an extra $10,000 for the community.
Yeah.
Not a
Maybe I
lot,
should
but
start charging my kids for dinner?
it's only a little percent. It's only a slight percent. It's just, yeah.
And it's going to mostly come from
No, tell
Gordon.
me about it.
I'll fill you in.
Gordon's Food Service is
Oh,
where most of
right,
that meals
right,
tax
yeah.
would come from.
Well,
Because we did
speaking,
this, we looked at that, and
speaking of Gordon,
Thank you. Thank you, Karen.
segueing.
Thanks,
so payment in lieu of taxes, I feel like it's our fiduciary duty at this point to pursue those as much as possible with all the educational institutions in Wenham. And I don't quite understand, and I was wondering if someone could articulate to me why that's not happening and what the history is. And I've asked before, and I
Because they
still
say
don't
no.
quite understand. So, but
That's what they say, no. And so that's why it's not happening. And that nonprofits are going to say, you have to, this is a multi-year effort to get a payment in lieu of tax pilot programs.
And they just got a $75 million
Saw that in the
infusion of
paper as
cash.
well.
So they're not hurt, and it's supposed to be for scholarships, I understand, but it's not as tight budget times for them now as it was a few months ago.
Periodically, over the last 10 years, been committees, FinCom and Selectmen combined, have gone to ask for versions of a pilot. And that you have to be willing to basically keep it at it over probably a 2 or 3 year period. It's the first answer you're going to get. I don't want to tip Gordon off too much, is we just hit our budget, I'm sorry, come back next year. Or we had a bad year, or the enrollment's down, or whatever. So that this, all nonprofits have the same playbook. So we have to be persistent, and it has to be at a leadership level. And Anthony and I talked about this, forming a small committee to
You're
start.
the man for the job, it sounds like.
Well,
I know how,
this is not the first time we've discussed it.
Right. So
You're absolutely
we're not going to get anything, well, I don't want to say too much on the mic here, and because that might be, but
Historically, they've been very aggressive at utilizing the nonprofit and religious institution as a shield. And it makes it very difficult, because they have attorneys that'll put up the shield and start defending themselves.
but they're like everybody else. They're going to say no. I mean, it's not, they're not worse than anybody
That
else.
doesn't
No, I know, but in Boston, there's an agreement
Tufts University.
That's
that,
because in Boston, they need to build stuff, and they're not going to get anything past, they're not going to get a building permit unless they agree to this. That's the
So-
difference in Boston.
so
The
is-
Boston Redevelopment Authority forces them to do that, particularly in the longer medical area, which I'm quite familiar with, which is where most of the
So
hospitals
they've
are.
worked out their angles of how to get their payment in lieu of taxes. So, it's obviously challenging, but is there a leadership commitment to work on that the
Well,
next several years?
We just discussed this last week, Anthony and I did, in that we're going to form a small committee to begin the dialogue, and that I wouldn't hold our breath that anything will materialize that would help this budget. But again, this is a long-term commitment. You have to have a dialogue with them, and that in the past, we had, I think, did they give us a police car?
Yeah, that was like 6 years ago, 40,000.
Yeah, in addition, the fire department does bill them back for various runs. So I've seen they've given anywhere in the past 5 years for that, anywhere between $30,000 to $60,000 we get back from them through calls, in addition to
But that's a service rendered call as
the
opposed to.
service rendered
Yeah,
calls.
yeah.
We are
It's
the
different.
host community. They are good people to have. here.
Absolutely. It's a fantastic,
Yet at the same time.
addition
it costs
to
us
Wenham.
To maintain roads. For
Yes.
access to their properties, and all the other healthcare services that we provide, permitting services, the building, you're absolutely on that.
We need a multi-year effort of a
Yeah.
small committee that stays together over a period of time.
Yeah.
Where we can have a meeting with Michael Lindsay and his staff and outline what our expectations and hope are, that it's going to take, if this is normal, it'll take several meetings, and that I think they want to be good citizens, and that we just have to be solicitous and persistent, and that we've only done this episodically. I think the last effort was made by Mike Lucy and some other people in the FinCom at the time. You may have been on there with him and do that. And that I think Peter and Mike Lucy and maybe somebody else, but no, that's gone. And that, so we need to restart that process, but I wouldn't hold your breath that we're going to have any positive impact on next year's proposed budget as a result of that.
Jack, can Gordon Conwell be put into this mix potentially? And Gordon Conwell costs the communities,
The Hamilton?
Hamilton and Wenham.
They're strictly Hamilton.
Huh?
They're strictly Hamilton.
Well, they,
I'm
except for the
talking about the
students,
school
but that's
committee.
the school. The
Yeah.
school would
Well,
have to
it's
negotiate that.
It's
I
our
mean, I
cost
think it
too. I
would
mean,
be,
they have 15 to 25 children.
right.
Oh,
We'd have
But
to
they
have a
don't
joint
pay
venture
per
with him
kid. That would
do
have to
that.
come through taxes to
Yeah, good idea.
Hamilton.
Why not?
Well, it would,
Try.
we would have tried to put it in the school budget. So it would come to us, both towns, but through the school budget.
How,
because-
I don't
Well,
understand,
because
what's
there
the
would be,
mechanism to get that in the school budget?
The school is educating those kids, so the cost of educating those kids is borne by the district, the school district. So, for years.
Cost per pupil is effectively higher shared according to the
We
split.
tried to,
So the school puts it in as an ask to Hamilton?
well, they
Yeah, I
they
believe it
have,
was.
they have, and it hasn't always worked.
And then what about Academy of Penguin Hall?
Well, that's a good suggestion, Jim, and the school. We should pursue that as well. And that
Just put it in the table.
Academy of Penguin Hall,
Yeah.
want to answer that one?
Does the leadership want to work on all the pilot options?
Absolutely, absolutely.
We can make you a committee of one and see what happens.
Just volunteer.
Come back to us next month and let us know you made out.
But there needs to be a strategy, so.
So is there any history of discussion with,
Yes,
So
but
all
it's very
the-
old.
I-
It's very old.
Relative to the academy, the only discussion I ever had was shortly before they opened, and it was a request that we not have too many discussions with the academy over a pilot, because after all, they were brand new and they were starting up, and the first few years were gonna be difficult, and I don't know that we've exactly, followed that advice on purpose, but I think that was the situation. They've been now open
It's the third year, I think.
Third year.
Yeah. So in your discussions with Gordon about pilot, would you consider rolling in discussions with Academy at Penguin Hall now that they're well-established?
after we're successful with Gordon, we could turn our attention to Academy of Penguin Hall, but Gordon is a much bigger fish to fry than, I don't want to say too much, and this is all
Yeah,
being videotaped on
yeah.
YouTube here, so
So
let's not give our strategy away too much here.
It sounds like, I mean, we just need, the principles and strategy, so to speak, kind of documented
Yeah.
in a way that can be shared publicly with known, people dedicated to the effort who, as you pointed out, Jack, are with it over the long haul because it's not an immediate turnaround, and can then gain some kind of public support and understanding on both sides. So it's known what Wenham's approach and thought process is
Right.
relative to hosting great, institutions that aren't otherwise paying tax.
In a
I think
good
Gordon's
neighbor
gonna listen to us,
context.
so I think that Michael and Lindsay, I think they're going to listen to us and be respectful, and that,
Yeah.
but-
I mean, Bill Scanlon did it over a number of years with Endicott. And now Endicott is a very serious contributor to the city of Beverly. And I think he did a fine job, and it was well called for because it's not a poor school.
they need building permits to construct many new buildings.
Right,
There
that's
as
right.
well.
Yeah.
There's also just the good neighbor
Pardon me?
context. There's also just the good neighbor context, which you
Sure.
mentioned before,
Yeah,
is a,
yeah, it's money, though.
yep. So,
I think
all right,
everyone should
thank
get a
you.
chance to ask, Michael, we haven't heard from you tonight, would you like to ask any questions? You saving them up for the end?
If you had, and I know you don't know the numbers, so I'm doing worst-case scenario, what's your tax rate go up to? So you don't close on your $1 million. The only way is the override, so now what's the tax rate? 20,
With-
21, 22?
No, it would be under 20, but it'd be in the probably high 19s.
Yeah, I think the big piece, so what we still don't know all our expenditures.
No, I know that, I'm
And,
just,
but to your,
worst-case scenario.
right, but to your point, Mike, even if we hold those constant, we then introduce, as, on the revenue side, with the Prop 2.5 increase that Anthony showed earlier, whatever your free cash scenario is and everything else, holding all expenditures constant, and then assuming revenue, we just have that nagging market value piece that gets in the way too. So I think that while we've been increasing our levy limit for the past 2 fiscal years via Prop 2.5 overrides that succeeded to the tune of 330,000, then 560,000, something like that, whatever we might end up with this year, tax rate could go either way. It's likely going up, which I think is where you were going, Mike, and you're right about that, but
It was,
So, where
we would
you-
have been at 20,
Not-
why we're not is because we did the reval
Market
last year,
value.
so it dropped, the tax rate went down a lot because
Right.
the values went way up. So
right.
if we didn't do the reval, we would easily probably be at 20.
exactly. Our estimates were in the mid-high 19s, just knocking on 20, but I hesitate to stress that too much because we're still taxing our residents significantly more as we increase
Let me
that
shift-
permanently.
Let me
that
shift the
override.
argument and ask a different question. And I'm gonna choke when I ask this question. I truly am. So if we may or may not look at increasing taxes, why wouldn't you increase it more to take care of your capital needs at the same time?
That's what I would recommend. If you're gonna do an override, double it, so you have more money for the future. But then you get you're gonna be getting drilled, and you need the approval of all the people to approve that, which is gonna be real tough to do.
Except we can do a debt service override, and the interest rates are historically low levels, certainly not-for-profits are, and we still have a AAA bond rating, which is amazing, higher than the U.S. government, which is amazing. And I think that this is the year that we should really be looking at capital projects that would be consistent with a debt service override. And that, these interest rates aren't going to stay this low forever. And we need the money and we need the capital. And even if we don't have all the projects, I think that's a good thing for us to pursue.
The thing with that, if we wanna do that, we'd wanna get a good group of them, because they're not gonna go out, we're gonna need to get it up to at least $1 million in capital probably.
I think we can
to
force
get-
that
to
issue,
get a
yes.
good- to get a
That's
good
probably
bond,
not a
because
problem.
They're not gonna recommend doing a bond for, $500,000, it's not gonna be worth it
Yeah,
for us.
I think we need to carefully evaluate what the capital needs are before, and we will, as part of the process, but
Yeah, but you still gotta pay for it though, too. I understand.
Over a period of time.
just, right.
Just changing the subject.
Well, and on that,
Gets ahead of you very easily.
on that point too, and I agree with Jack,
Yeah, if you wanna- if you
we
wanna-
have over the past, this history that we're looking at, things that we've done, we've moved away from borrowing for some of our capital. Like, we used to always borrow for police cars.
Yep.
Fire trucks. And we've moved into putting them, leasing them perhaps, and putting those lease expenses over some number of years in our operating budget. And maybe this is the year, to Jack's point, of looking at some of those things and going back to, borrowing. Because I think we have the capacity, and it relieves the operating budget a little bit.
Depends what the project is. You certainly don't want to borrow on a police car for 10 years when it's not going to last
yeah.
4 years, so,
No, but-
but yes,
But
yeah,
that's what,
A roof
historically.
for the building down the street here.
certainly will.
But historically, we have been putting things, we used to borrow for a fleet of police cars or something, and then we started buying or leasing one or two a year, and they ended up in the capital budget. And I bet if we looked at the capital budget line by line, there's a fair amount
I
of
think
things.
like mini excavator, things like that fall into the like 100-ish, 200-ish, if I'm not too far off on that we do
Trucks.
lease to own
Yeah.
type.
I just think we should look at
Lease
everything
arrangement,
that we
long-term
could
leases.
potentially.
What's happened too
Bundle
was the
together.
Modernization Act changed that a
That's
few
right.
years ago. That they made it so before it was easier to go on with the Modernization Act came. Now you can do bans, short-term ones, up to 10 years.
Right.
Before you only could do them 3 years. So people were giving you bonds for lower dollar amounts because you couldn't do the ban option. So I think that's why we were able to do that more back then. We're now doing it, like with the iron rail, it was smarter for us to do a 10-year ban instead of a 20-year debt because of the cost of everything. It was cheaper, saved us money to do the ban. And I think that's the Modernization Act kind of changed, why we did that before and why
So
we're
that's
not
a
doing it now.
legislative or legal change?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it structurally possible to take our current debt service that's out of the operating budget and transfer it into this hypothetical $1 million debt?
No.
You can't structurally do that.
Well, we've already,
The only thing we could do is we could retire that debt and roll it into, that was one of the things we had talked about when
With Sean was here.
Cohen was here.
Yeah.
We don't have a ton of in-levy debt service.
Right.
I mean, most of our debt is excluded.
Right.
I'm not suggesting that wouldn't be a great idea,
Yeah,
but it might be $150,000.
Not enough to
I
make
don't know
it.
when it's coming off the books. We certainly wouldn't want to do that if it's coming off the
Yeah.
books in a couple of
yeah.
years.
That's right.
Which it actually might be.
It's something to look at while we're looking at every
Yeah.
possible
It's,
option.
it's on our list. That's why we, Patty and I have a list that everything's on the table to be looked at.
it's hard to get the taxpayers to approve a debt service override for something we've already spent the money on.
Yeah.
You know, I mean,
And actually,
what, I mean, just coming back now? You know,
Opening a credit card to pay off
you know,
another one.
It was 3 years ago. Something new, where the option is, if we don't do it, that we're not going to fix the roof or something else like that, there's a collection of items. It's a lot easier to do it if you can identify a future capital need along with the cost of doing so, as opposed to retrofitting something that you've already,
That's why I suggested
think.
pull that out of the closet and let's take a look at it and see when the boilers are in need and the roofs and whatever.
On just a detail, on slide 5, you mentioned regarding the reserves, and we have a quote, "a hard time paying our bills." Are we out past 30 days in our bill payments?
the last 5 minutes.
No, but we are, this time of year, I am sweating it out.
Few sleepless nights
I have
later.
a lot of sleepless nights because we're
Not too
waiting
many
for
more.
tax payments to come in. Keep in mind, we don't have enough reserves between our free cash and our stabilization, which is what we have. We have the 250 and the $500,000 or so of stabilization to cover even one school payment. I mean,
One
think
monthly
about
school
that.
payment.
And you
One-
couldn't get to stabilization in time to do that anyway.
We couldn't get to stabilization, nor would you want to. I mean,
Right.
you know,
You'd have to do
we
a
have
special
to do
town
a special
meeting.
town
Right.
meeting for that. And, you know, again, it points to, the structural deficit that we're in here. And, you know, and then we have times of the year where there's plenty, and, you know, we can certainly, as we move forward, I would suggest, look at your bonding, because we are very heavily weighted at some points of the year with our bond payments. I get like $800,000 I had to pay in the last 2 months. be certainly better if we could spread that out a little bit. So certainly the next time we go out to borrow, we want to, structure
Figure out
that,
the
yeah.
time of
The
the
time,
year.
right.
Yeah.
But I mean, as far as our reserves go, kind of getting back to that, I mean, you want to build, in my opinion, some level of flexibility within the town, or some level of ability to react when things turn a little bit. And I'm not talking, I don't think, any of us are suggesting we need, a $2 million capital reserve. I mean, it could be something to start as small as, okay, we're gonna seed $50,000 for capital reserves, and let it go, and then all of a sudden you have a big project, or we can even smooth debt service for a project. I've seen a lot of towns do that. You set up a capital reserve fund, it builds and builds and builds, then when you have a debt, you can smooth, especially for large projects, when the payments can get jumpy, you can do that. And there's a lot of things we can do, but clearly, it would be great if we could start thinking about those things. Another one that's a big issue is personnel for buyouts.
Right.
One person walks out the door, my office is set into a frenzy trying to figure out how we're gonna take care of it in that year. And that's not necessary.
And didn't we begin a discussion that we weren't able to complete last year about a personnel
Yes.
reserve
Yeah.
fund?
Yeah.
So that's,
Yeah, we
we
did.
should maybe pick that up again and just kick it around.
It's also the type of reserve fund that doesn't need to number in the hundreds of thousands in
No,
terms
no,
of
no, no.
allocate, right? I
No.
mean, you're talking 20,000 can make it.
You kind of can look
Help.
out who's retiring. I think the next big one would be Chief Perkins.
Yeah.
And that would be
It'll be a big
significant.
one.
Yep.
Yeah. So, and that's, minimum 18 months he's indicated, so now's the time to put something aside
Right.
towards that.
Yeah, and I think I would call that a retirement reserve fund or
We call it
something like that,
compensate
because,
something.
yeah, because
Yeah.
talking about a personnel reserve fund has
Right.
come up in the past, and people are like, what?
Yeah.
What do you
Dodgy.
mean?
Well,
Yeah.
it's there's
Communication is important with stuff.
yeah, I mean, there are targeted components of it, and then there's just the annual appropriation to it that can be discretionary at a reasonable amount.
Yeah,
Sure.
if you know someone's
Without-
coming, like Chief Perks, he put 40,000 in this year, and then
Right.
if you know nothing's coming, you can maybe just put a couple, 5, 10,000 in the next couple of years. It's to keep a little pocket going in there, and then
And you can also build into financial policies, things like if our health insurance comes in under budget for the year, we're gonna deflect that into a reserve fund.
Right.
Instead of.
Just letting it go back into the,
Instead of
Just
going
use it,
back into
right.
free cash, you can deflect it into a reserve fund. And there's just really small ways that you can do that and start building these things up and providing a little bit of a cushion. Again, the good news is it's not a giant budget. There's ways to do it.
Right.
and by design is so much better than by
So-
default.
Yeah.
Patty, how is that, what you just said, better or different than if we over budget for health insurance, that excess that we don't spend goes into free cash, and we have a policy that puts some amount from free cash into a reserve?
It's no different. It's-
Right.
it's- It's no
That
different.
seems more
Yeah.
flexible
It
to me.
is.
Yeah.
Right?
yeah.
Right.
We just
pay more attention to
I've seen
free
that done
cash.
before, because it kind of kept us on the straight and narrow that we would try to do that, because some towns, we had instances where police officers were walking out the door and it was $100,000.
Yeah, well, that is,
It's,
And it was tough.
for instance, Littleton had 2 retail marijuana licenses to give out. And when we were having discussions, I had recommended that before, let's not put that in the operating budget. We're looking at a potential town hall building project and a COA and a library. Let's put any potential revenue in there in the capital reserve. So that's that maybe new type of big-time growth where we don't want, we can have an opportunity to use it for another purpose.
that's what we need, some new big-time growth.
That would certainly be helpful.
In the next couple of years, I think we're going to see a
We'll see.
little bit in terms of 2 big developments that are coming online, but not going to solve this problem. It's certainly not going to solve it this year. And maybe never, yeah.
Does your committee have any more questions?
I invite FinCom, any other questions, or?
So everything's on the,
Captain Jones?
everything's on the table?
Yeah, right here.
Salaries, everything? Well, you probably, no, so I probably can't touch
I
that.
think your process is a good one,
Oh, I have
as you're going forward. Just
Yeah, okay.
saying.
a thought or a question. There's a lot of services that the town provides, and they will remain unnamed for now. But in terms of everything being on the table, is there anything, or has the budget been scrubbed and services been scrubbed for things that are provided by the town that residents could get otherwise relatively easily? Because there are things that are provided here that I haven't seen provided in other places that I've lived. But here's a question. Some things are statutorily mandated by the state of Massachusetts, so I just am not sure what some of those things are. So in terms of substituting services, is there anything we could eliminate from here that could be easily substituted by a resident elsewhere?
For
Yeah,
example, do you have an example? You said we do.
Well, healthcare, flu clinics. I don't want to name names because I haven't scrubbed it, but I just named a name. That's just a very theoretical
right,
example.
some of the stuff, yeah.
It's relatively easy for people to go somewhere else to get a flu shot.
That's not a big thing there, because we get reimbursed for all of the flu.
And that's just a theoretical example.
Right, that's
But
just-
there's
Yeah.
there's
That's
other
more
like
so the-
officers and services that I see the town has, which are great, and maybe they're, well,
For example, you have an example?
the health-related services.
But you just answered the flu clinic. What else?
Well, there's other health-related services.
example?
The other things that the Board of Health does and the health officer does. So, these need to be researched further, which is why I'm bringing it up now, because I don't have enough knowledge.
Yeah.
But there are other things I've seen that I've been like, is that a service that could be provided otherwise? And, or is it statutorily mandated, like some of the
Right.
the green, or like energy conservation officer. So I don't know. That's why I'm raising
You know,
it.
Terry, I
It
think,
to be looked at,
you know, when
right.
we go through the budgets, my plan, especially being new in town, is I am gonna really make them build their budget from ground up and really prove to me and show me why they're doing something, what is needed, and then is there other alternative ways that we can deliver the same service? So those type of questions that you're bringing up, I intend to do that and intend to, the Board of Selectmen as well as FinCom to ask those same questions. And, we really have to dig deep and look at everything, because all those little things can add up, the Pleasant Ponds and all of that stuff that can add up, so,
Those are all good ideas to keep.
yeah, those are all great ideas, and like I said, it's
Yeah.
both sides, I'm certainly don't want the taxpayers of Wenham to foot the $1 million bill here, I think that's why I mentioned our healthcare, which I'm a benefit. I have the health insurance provided by the town. Some structural change to that may cost me something, but I think that may have to be something we have to weigh. Is there plan design changes? Is there our indemnity plan, the top plan that we have? There's really not much of a difference with the indemnity plan to the HMO. If we can get people off that, it can save some significant money. I am one of those people that's on the indemnity plan. When I came here, that was the last thing I was looking at. I just wanted to get in the door, and I said, all right, just give me this health plan. I'll just pay for the most expensive. I really don't need that when I'm looking at it and when I'm talking, right, yeah. Because an HMO covers the same thing. So all of that stuff is really has to be looked at, because there's significant, those are big ticket dollar items, which, we talked about opt-outing. If somebody doesn't want to take our plan, don't take our plan. All right, we'll give you $2,500 for not taking our plan, because it's going to save the town money. So these are all the things that we're starting to talk about, and I didn't want to talk about it too much tonight because it's really preliminary.
Right, that's why I didn't want to get into the details
into the
either, but
weeds.
just the concept of things that are being provided that residents or employees could get elsewhere
Yeah.
relatively easily with some kind of substitute.
So I didn't think I had any more questions, but we don't have the ability, our employees do not have the ability right now to opt out of insurance through
Well, we
town?
do, we just opt, it's $300 if you opt out. I'm saying if we can maybe increase that incentive, maybe 3,000 if you opt out, and then it may be like an incentive. Me and my wife are pretty close on healthcare.
Okay,
I chose to come here because it saved us a couple $100.
okay.
If you do an opt-out,
So, yeah,
Oh, yeah.
okay.
then
So if we
I get it.
switch,
That's
we say to
fine.
Chris, I'll give you $2,500 just for an entrance, just
We
throw
said a
that
couple
out
hundred, but
there. $2,500, and he says, well, I'll jump to my wife's because I have $2,500, but we
okay.
just saved it a
it's
Yeah,
good
amount.
for me
I
getting
it
off
was
our
a fine
plan,
point,
by
but I didn't
paying me
understand it.
$2,500 is gonna save the town like $18,000.
Yep.
Right.
So it could be a good thing to look
Yeah,
into.
people do that. They also put a waiting period for 60 to 90 days.
Some ago when I was there, you had to be on our insurance for a year, and then you could opt out. So you can't, so if someone came on and they weren't gonna take it anyways, they shouldn't be getting that. So like, if I was never gonna take the insurance, you maybe don't offer that opt-out, you need to get them
Oh,
on the
right, right,
insurance
right,
first.
right. Got
That's
it.
a common practice.
Yeah.
Can I just one quick question, John, sorry, on the revenue side? Will this be the, Chief Kavanaugh, will this be the first full year that we have the ambulance service up and running?
Yeah.
So we could potentially see some improved revenues there, or a better
Oh, yeah.
projection of revenues in that line?
But I caution,
2020 would be
I don't know.
our first full year,
Yeah.
so we're basically
Current year-
the
current
21
year is-
budget should be a pretty full year in 20, so that's what we're basing the
For
revenue
21,
on for,
yeah.
and one thing, what we did see this past year is that we had a problem with the ambulance, where we had to get,
Oh,
we
yeah.
had to purchase that ambulance. And that 39 days, correct me if I'm wrong, of being out of service, was
lost some-
gross billings of 39,000. Now, we don't, that's not what we'll eventually get from that. We get some percentage, but still, so if we count on a revenue and we have no backup, and I know that the fire department discussed the backup plan with the old ambulance, and that's something that we should really look at, because if we're gonna count on that revenue, we better have better be able to provide that 365 days a year.
Anthony, just one last question. Have you done any projections going forward? What do the next 2 to 3 years look like? And if you haven't, that's not a problem. I think it's something we ought to take a look at so that we know. And
This is a piece of cake, and you're really worried about the years 2 and 3.
John, one thing that, I looked at coming to Wenham and just even, I'll go back to the capital improvement plan. When I was in Brookline, we used to go out 10 years and beyond.
Well, I
And-
fully agree.
And it's, right now, we're only looking at a 5-year period. I'd like us to look at a larger period of time, just to put things on the radar screen, just to be able to know what's coming up.
That's where your capital comes in, that's where other things can come in.
Exactly. We know a fire truck doesn't last
We know
forever.
something's fallen off the
Right.
radar as opposed to something may come on.
Yeah, so, I'd like to see inventories of the assets that people are gonna be asking, for replacement. Well, what's your current list? What's your current inventory? And have a plan, so I'm always used to, when I was in Brooklyn, I had a plan. I had bunker gear, I knew when they had to be replaced, and I had a chart for every employee, and I knew how many employees came up and when it had to be done, and bulletproof vests, and vehicles, and apparatus, and all of that
The
stuff.
reason I say
There was a
this,
plan.
because in business, you never look at short periods of time.
No,
Even
no.
a year is very short when you look at the larger the operation is, and it doesn't look so bad when you put it in perspective. Oh, yeah, we had a bad quarter, or I had a 30% vacancy
Right.
rate a year and a half ago. It's now at 100%. Everything turned around, but boy, I'll tell you, it was tough
Yeah.
for about 6 or 8 months, revenue-wise.
I would agree, and that's why, even when I mentioned, we'd like to not rely on free cash to,
Yes.
that's a long-term goal. Can we get to that year one? Probably not. Can we make progress toward that? And I think that's what the thing is, we have to have a plan. That's the ultimate goal.
Work from a plan.
Work from a plan, we know what our goal is, now let's work towards getting there.
Got it.
Anthony, thank you for your presentation tonight. That was excellent. I think it's a lot of food for thought, and some good ideas and some good questions.
Yeah, thank all of you.
Yeah, staff was fantastic.
I move the Board of Selectmen adjourn.
Second?
My favorite motion, by the way. All in favor?
Aye.
I move FinCom adjourn.
Second.
Thanks, Gary. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
I'd love to.